The Winters house always smelled like cinnamon and pine. Even in summer, when the windows were thrown open to catch whatever breeze drifted through our sleepy New England town, that scent lingered in the curtains, the wooden floors, the old leather couch where I'd spent countless evenings with Miles playing video games or watching movies we weren't supposed to see. Their house felt like home in a way mine never had. My own was quiet, sterile. My father's architecture books stacked with mathematical precision. My mother's careful arrangements of neutral-toned furniture that were never to be disturbed. The Winters place was chaos and comfort and noise. Mrs. Winters baked when she was stressed, which was often. Mr. Winters built things in the garage that sometimes worked. Miles's younger sister Emma left trails of art supplies and half-finished projects everywhere she went. And then there was Logan, Miles's older brother. 7 years older than us, Logan had always existed in a different orbit. When we were kids playing with action figures, he was already working on cars. When we were awkward teenagers, he was already a man, leaving for the military with a duffel bag over his shoulder and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I remember watching him go, standing behind Miles in the driveway, thinking how strange it was that someone could just leave and take a piece of a home with them. He'd been gone 6 years. Long enough that his bedroom had stolidly transformed into a storage room, though Mrs. Winters refused to pack away everything. Just in case, she'd say whenever Miles suggested they could use the space for something else. Just in case came on a Tuesday in June. "Ethan! Doors open!" Mrs. Winters called when I knocked, though I hadn't knocked on their door in years. The familiar creak of the screen door welcomed me as I stepped into the kitchen. Miss Winters was elbow-deep in bread dough, flour dusting her forearms, and a streak of it across her flushed cheek. "Miles is upstairs," she said, nodding toward the ceiling where the faint thump of bass filtered down. "Can you tell him to turn that down? I swear that boy is going deaf at 22. "Will do, Mrs. W. And take these up with you." She gestured with her chin toward a plate of cookies on the counter. "They're still warm." I grabbed the plate and was halfway to the stairs when the back door opened. Time did that strange thing then, stretching and compressing all at once. The man who stepped through the door was both instantly familiar and completely foreign. Logan Winters had left as a boy playing at being a man. He'd returned as something else entirely. His hair was cut shorter than I remembered, dark brown with threads of amber when the sunlight hit it through the window. His shoulders were broader, filling out his simple white t-shirt in a way that made something catch in my throat. 6 years had carved definition into his jaw, added a weathered quality to his tanned skin. But his eyes, those were the same. Deep hazel with flecks of gold, serious and thoughtful. "Logan," Mrs. Winters whispered, hands frozen in the dough. He set his bags down slowly, as if afraid a sudden movement might shatter the moment. "Hi, Mom." She rushed to him, not bothering to wipe her hands, leaving flower prints on his shirt as she wrapped her arms around him. He closed his eyes when he hugged her back, something like relief softening his features. And then he looked over his mother's shoulder and saw me, standing awkwardly with a plate of cookies, feeling like an intruder in a moment I wasn't meant to witness. "Ethan," he said, surprise coloring his voice. I shifted my weight, suddenly aware of how I must look. Hair too long, wearing one of Miles's old band t-shirts, skinny jeans with a hole in one knee. "Hey, Logan. Welcome home." His mouth curved up slightly, not quite a smile, but something warmer than politeness. "Thanks. You grew up." Something about the way he said it made heat crawl up my neck. I was 23 now, no longer the gangly teenager he'd last seen. Still lean, but I'd filled out some. My features had sharpened. "Yeah, well, 6 years." I swallowed. "You too." Mrs. Winters pulled back, wiping tears with flour-covered fingers. "Why didn't you tell us you were coming? I would have prepared your room, made something special for dinner." "I wanted to surprise you," Logan said, his voice deeper than I remembered, steadier. "Didn't want to make a big deal of it." "Not a big deal? My son coming home after 6 years isn't a big deal?" She swatted his arm, leaving another flower print. The corners of his eyes crinkled. "I should have known better." "Logan," Miles' voice thundered down the stairs before he appeared, practically leaping down the last few steps. Holy shit! Language, Mrs. Winters said automatically, but she was smiling too widely for it to carry any weight. Miles crashed into his brother with enough force to make Logan step back, laughing, a rich, warm sound that seemed to fill the kitchen. When did you get back? Why didn't you call? Are you staying? Logan disentangled himself enough to look at his brother. Just now. Wanted to surprise you, and yeah, I'm back for good. For good? Mrs. Winters repeated, her voice catching. Logan's gaze shifted, something complicated passing behind his eyes. My contract's done. I'm not re-enlisting. I stood frozen, still clutching the plate of cookies, watching this family knit itself back together while something strange and unnamed fluttered in my chest. I should leave, I thought. This isn't for me to see. As if reading my mind, Logan's eyes found mine again. Still coming around to eat all our food, Ethan? The tension broke. I felt a smile tug at my lips. Your mom's cookies are worth it. They always were. There was a warmth in his voice, a familiarity that surprised me. I didn't think he'd really noticed me much back then, just his little brother's quiet friend who was always hanging around. Miles grabbed a cookie from the plate in my hands. Logan used to hide them from me. Save them for later. I'd find stashes in his room. Survival tactic, Logan said, eyes still on me. Living with you. And just like that, I was pulled back into the orbit of the Winters family, but everything had shifted. The axis had tilted. I felt it in the way Logan's gaze lingered a moment too long before he turned to answer his mother's rapid-fire questions. I felt it in the strange awareness that prickled across my skin. I felt it in the sudden, irrational thought that flashed through my mind. I shouldn't be noticing the way his t-shirt pulls across his shoulders. Dinner at the Winters house that night was louder than usual, which was saying something. Mr. Winters came home from work to find his oldest son sitting at the kitchen counter and dropped his briefcase with a clatter. Emma, now 16 and professing to be too cool for family dinners, actually sat at the table without her phone. Miles kept asking questions about places Logan had been, things he'd seen. I tried to leave 3 times. Mrs. Winters wouldn't hear of it. Your family, Ethan, she said, pushing me gently toward the dining room. Besides, I made enough to feed an army. So I sat in my usual spot across from Miles, except now Logan was at the head of the table where Mr. Winters usually sat. He'd insisted his father keep his place, but Mr. Winters had refused, saying, "It's your first night home, son." I felt Logan's presence like a physical thing. Every time he spoke, my attention was drawn to him even when I tried to focus on my plate. The way he held his fork, the careful precision with which he cut his food. Military habits, I guessed, the thoughtful pause before he answered questions, the way he deflected when the conversation veered too close to whatever he'd seen overseas. So, what are you going to do now? Mr. Winters asked, as he served himself seconds. Logan took a sip of water, his throat working. I looked away. I've been thinking about that, he said. I've got some savings. I might take some time to figure things out. Maybe take some classes. You could work at the garage with Uncle Dave, Miles suggested. He's always complaining about not having enough help. Maybe, Logan said non-committally. I'm pretty good with engines now. Whatever you decide, Mrs. Winters said, reaching over to squeeze his hand. We're just glad you're home. Home. The word echoed strangely in my head. I had an apartment now, a small studio I could barely afford on what I made as a barista while finishing my graphic design degree. But it didn't feel like home. What about you, Ethan? Logan's question caught me off guard. I looked up to find him watching me, his expression unreadable. Me? All's mentioned you're in school? Graphic design, right? Something warm unfurled in my chest at the thought that he and Miles had talked about me, that he'd remembered that detail. Yeah, 1 more semester. He's really good, Miles said around a mouthful of potatoes. He designed the new logo for Harmon's bookstore downtown. I felt my cheeks warm at the praise. It was just a favor for Mrs. Harmon. She paid you, didn't she? Miles countered. In store credit. Logan's mouth quirked up. Still reading everything you can get your hands on? The fact that he remembered that about me, the quiet kid who always had a book, made something shift behind my ribs. Some habits die hard. His eyes held mine for a moment longer than necessary. Some habits are worth keeping. The conversation moved on, but I felt altered somehow, seen in a way I hadn't expected. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of stories and laughter. When it was time to clear the table, I stood automatically to help, gathering plates as I'd done hundreds of times before. In the kitchen, Logan appeared beside me at the sink, rolling up his sleeves. "I'll wash you dry." His forearm brushed against mine, warm skin against skin, and I nearly dropped the glass I was holding. "Sure." We worked in silence for a few minutes, the clink of dishes and the sound of running water filling the space between us. I was hyper-aware of his proximity, the careful, methodical way he cleaned each dish before passing it to me. His hands were different than I remembered, stronger, calloused, with a thin scar running across the back of his right one. "Miles says you practically lived here in high school," he said finally, his voice low enough that it felt like a private conversation, even with the family just in the next room. I focused on drying a plate with more attention than it required. "My parents traveled a lot. Still do. Your mom took pity on me. Mom's good at collecting strays." There was no judgment in his voice, only a gentle understanding that made me look up at him. He was already watching me, something thoughtful in his expression. "It's good. This house should be full." "It's not the same when you're not here," I said, before I could think better of it. His hand stilled in the soapy water. "No?" I swallowed, unsure why I'd said it, unsure what I even meant. I hardly knew him, really. He'd been this distant figure, this person who existed primarily in stories Miles told, and yet his absence had been palpable in this house, like a room everyone walked around but never entered. "Your mom keeps your pictures up," I said instead of explaining. "Talks about you all the time." Something like pain flickered across his features before he masked it, returning to the dishes. "I should have visited more. You were serving your country." The words sounded hollow, rehearsed, the thing people always said. Logan snorted softly. "Is that what I was doing?" The bitterness in his voice surprised me. I didn't know what to say, so I stayed quiet, accepting the glass he handed me, careful not to let our fingers touch. After a moment, he sighed. "Sorry. It's just complicated. You don't have to explain." He looked at me then, really looked at me, his eyes searching my face for something I couldn't name. "No, I don't. Thank you." We finished the dishes in a more comfortable silence. When we returned to the living room, Miles had set up the old gaming console, insisting that Logan join us for a round of the racing game they used to play. Logan hesitated, glancing at me. 3 players is better anyway, I said. More competition. He settled onto the couch beside me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the clean, soapy scent of him mixed with something distinctly masculine. I tried to focus on the game, but every time he shifted or laughed or groaned in defeat, my attention fractured. "This is Miles's brother," I reminded myself fiercely. "My best friend's brother, that's all." But later that night, driving home in the dark, all I could think about was the way Logan had said goodbye, standing on the porch, hands in his pockets, watching as I walked to my car. "See you around, Ethan," he'd called, his voice carrying in the quiet night air. Not a question, but not quite a statement either. Something in between. Something like hope. I didn't plan to go back to the Winters house so soon. I told myself I'd give them time. Time to reconnect. Time for Logan to settle in. But 3 days later, Miles texted asking if I could help him move some furniture. His mother was reclaiming Logan's room from its storage status, and there were boxes to relocate to the attic. "Just a few things," Miles promised when I arrived. "Won't take long." A few things turned out to be at least 20 boxes of varying sizes, along with an old dresser that needed to go to the garage until Mrs. Winters decided if she wanted to refinish it or get rid of it. "Where's Logan?" I asked, trying to sound casual, as we maneuvered a particularly heavy box up the narrow attic stairs. "Job hunting," Miles grunted. Uncle Dave wants him at the garage, but I think he's considering other options too. We finished with the attic and were wrestling the dresser through the kitchen toward the back door when Logan returned. He was wearing dark jeans and a navy button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, looking more put together than I'd ever seen him. The sight made me lose my grip on the dresser. "Shit, sorry," I muttered as Miles yelped. "Need a hand?" Logan asked, already stepping forward to take my end. "We got it," Miles said, but Logan was already beside me, his hands replacing mine on the worn wood. "I've got this side," he said, not to Miles but to me, his eyes meeting mine. "Take a break." Heat crept up my neck as I stepped back, watching the brothers navigate the dresser through the door with ease. I followed them out to the garage, an old converted carriage house that stood separate from the main building, connected by a covered walkway. The space was cluttered with Mr. Winter's woodworking projects, tools hanging on pegboards, sawdust catching the light that filtered through dusty windows. They set the dresser down against a wall, and Miles immediately checked his phone. "Crap, I'm supposed to meet Alyssa in 20 minutes. He looked at me apologetically. "Rain check on video games?" "Sure," I said, ignoring the flutter of nerves at the thought of being left alone with Logan. "No problem. You can stay," Miles added, already backing toward the door. "Mom's making that pasta thing you like for dinner." Before I could answer, he was gone, leaving me standing awkwardly in the garage with Logan, who had moved to examine an old motorcycle in the corner that I knew had been Mr. Winters' ongoing project for years. "He's still the same," Logan said, running his hand along the dusty seat of the bike. "Always running somewhere." I shifted my weight, unsure if I should leave or stay. "Yeah, some things don't change." Logan looked over his shoulder at me. "And some things do." There was something in his voice that made my pulse quicken. I moved closer to the motorcycle, needing something to focus on besides the way his shirt stretched across his shoulders. "Mr. Winters has been working on this forever. I don't think it's ever actually run." "It ran once," Logan said, crouching down to examine the engine. "When I was about 17. Dad and I got it working for maybe 10 minutes before it died again." He ran his fingers along the metal, tracing the lines of it with a familiarity that suggested he'd done this many times before. "It's a beautiful machine." I watched his hands, strong, capable hands with blunt fingernails and that thin scar I'd noticed before. There was something hypnotic about the way he touched the motorcycle, with reverence and understanding. "Could you fix it?" I asked. He glanced up, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Probably. It would give me something to do besides think about what the hell I'm doing with my life." The raw honesty of the statement caught me off guard. Is that what job hunting was about today? He stood, wiping his hands on his jeans, leaving dark smudges on the denim. "Partly. Uncle Dave offered me a job at the garage. Like Miles said, it's a good offer." "But?" I prompted, sensing his hesitation. Logan leaned against the workbench, studying me with an intensity that made me want to look away. But I didn't. "But I'm not the same person who left here," he said finally. "I'm trying to figure out what that means." I understood that feeling more than he knew, the sense of being slightly out of step with the person everyone expected you to be. "I think that's normal." He laughed, a short, dry sound. "Normal. Right." He ran a hand through his hair, leaving it slightly mussed in a way that was far too appealing. "What about you? Is your life turning out the way you expected?" The question was probing, personal in a way that suggested he actually wanted to know, that he wasn't just making conversation. I considered deflecting, but found myself answering honestly. "No, I thought I'd have it more figured out by now." I leaned against the motorcycle, mirroring his casual stance. "When I was a kid, I had this idea that adults just knew things, what they wanted, who they were. Turns out, we're all just guessing." Logan's expression softened. "That's surprisingly profound, Ethan." My name in his mouth did something to me. A warm flutter that traveled from my chest to my stomach. "I have my moments." We fell silent, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The garage was warm, dust motes dancing in the slanted afternoon light. Outside, a lawnmower rumbled in a neighbor's yard. Inside, time seemed to stretch and slow. "I used to notice you, you know," Logan said suddenly, his voice quiet, "when you'd come over. You were always so serious, always watching everything like you were trying to memorize it." I stared at him, caught between embarrassment and a strange thrill. "I didn't think you paid attention to me at all. You were hard to miss." His eyes held mine, something unnamed passing between us. The quiet one with the thoughtful eyes, who always had his nose in a book. My heart was pounding so loudly, I was sure he could hear it. "I was just a kid." "You're not a kid anymore," he said softly. Before I could process what that meant, before I could even begin to untangle the complexity of emotions his words stirred. His phone rang, shattering the moment. He pulled it from his pocket, glancing at the screen. "Mom," he said, then answered. "Hey, yeah, we got it moved." "Sure, I'll tell him." He hung up and looked at me. "Dinner's almost ready. Mom wants to know if you're staying." I should go, I thought. I should make an excuse and leave. Whatever was happening here, whatever this tension was that hung in the air between us, was dangerous territory. "I should probably get home," I said, but it sounded weak even to my own ears. Logan studied me for a moment. "I could give you a ride after, if you wanted." The offer was innocent enough, but there was an undertone that made my skin prickle with awareness. "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to." He pushed off from the workbench and took a step closer to me. "I want to." Want. The word hung between us, loaded with meaning I wasn't sure I was ready to acknowledge. I swallowed hard. "Okay," I said finally. "Dinner sounds good." Dinner was a quieter affair than the previous night. Just Mrs. Winters, Logan, and me around the table, with Mr. Winters working late and Miles out with his girlfriend. Mrs. Winters carried most of the conversation, telling Logan about neighborhood changes, local gossip, people he used to know. I was hyper-aware of Logan across the table, the way he listened attentively to his mother, the way he occasionally glanced at me with a look I couldn't decipher. Every time our eyes met, something electric passed between us, making it hard to focus on my food. "I ran into your mother at the store yesterday, Ethan," Mrs. Winters said, pulling my attention back to the conversation. "She mentioned they're going to Europe next month." 3 weeks in Italy, I confirmed. "A second honeymoon, apparently." "That's lovely," she said, though her tone suggested she thought otherwise. Mrs. Winters had never approved of how often my parents traveled without me, even now that I was an adult. "They deserve some time away," I said, the response automatic, rehearsed. "Dad's been working a lot." I felt Logan's eyes on me, but didn't look up. I didn't want to see pity there. After dinner, I helped Mrs. Winters clear the table while Logan went to get his keys. She hummed as she wrapped leftovers, a habit that had always made the kitchen feel warm and lived in. "It's good to see you two getting along," she said casually. I nearly dropped the plate I was rinsing. "Me and Logan?" She smiled knowingly. "He was always so serious, even before he left. It's nice to see him relaxed around someone." Before I could formulate a response, Logan appeared in the doorway. "Ready to go?" The drive to my apartment was only 10 minutes, but it stretched into something longer as Logan took the long way around, windows down, warm summer air rushing through the car. Music played softly from the speakers, something indie and melancholic that I didn't recognize. "New place?" Logan asked as he pulled up to my building, a converted old house split into 4 apartments with a sagging porch and peeling white paint. "Yeah," I said, suddenly self-conscious about the shabby exterior. "It's not much, but it's mine." He studied the building, then me, his expression unreadable in the dim light from the street lamp. "Want to show me?" My pulse jumped. "It's a mess." "I spent 6 years in military barracks, Ethan. I'm not exactly going to judge." I hesitated, knowing I should say no, knowing that inviting him in would cross some invisible line. But curiosity, or something deeper, won out. "Sure, if you want." We climbed the creaking stairs to the second floor, and I fumbled with my keys at the door, suddenly nervous. My apartment was small, 1 room with a kitchenette in the corner, a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in, and a bed that doubled as my couch during the day. Books were stacked everywhere, along with art supplies and the mismatched furniture I'd collected from thrift stores. Logan stepped inside, his presence immediately filling the space, making it seem smaller than it was. He looked around slowly, taking in the sketches pinned to the walls, the overflowing bookshelf, the neatly made bed with its blue comforter. "It suits you," he said finally. "It's small. It's yours." He moved to the bookshelf, running his finger along the spines, pausing at titles he recognized. "You've read all of these?" "Most of them." I stayed by the door, watching him explore my space, feeling strangely vulnerable. "Some more than once." He picked up a sketchbook that was lying open on my desk, glancing at me for permission. I nodded, and he began to flip through it slowly, studying each drawing with careful attention. They were mostly landscapes, buildings around town, a few portraits of friends. "These are good," he said, his voice quiet with genuine admiration. "Really good." "Thanks." I shifted my weight, uncomfortable with the praise but warmed by it all the same. He continued through the book until he came to a page that made him pause. I moved closer, curious, then felt heat flood my face when I realized which sketch he'd found. It was an old drawing from years ago, Logan in his military uniform, standing in the winter's driveway on the day he'd left. I'd drawn it from memory, trying to capture the conflicted expression on his face, the way the sunlight had caught in his hair. "When did you do this?" he asked, his voice strange. I couldn't lie. "After you left." Miles had that photo on his desk, the one your mom took before you got in the car. Logan stared at the drawing for a long moment, then closed the book carefully and set it down. When he turned to me, his expression was intense, searching. "Why did you draw me?" he asked. The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. I couldn't tell him the truth, that even then, at 17, I'd been fascinated by him in a way I hadn't understood, that I'd drawn him to try to make sense of the confusing feelings that stirred whenever Miles mentioned his name. "I draw people who matter to my friends," I said finally, the half-truth sticking in my throat. "To their family." Logan took a step closer to me, close enough that I could see the flecks of amber in his hazel eyes, could smell that clean, masculine scent that clung to his skin. "Is that the only reason?" My heart hammered against my ribs. "Logan, I always knew you saw me differently," he said softly, the words barely above a whisper. He reached out, his hand hovering near my face for a moment before he took another step closer. "Differently than anyone else did." Time seemed to stop. We stood there in the dim light of my small apartment, inches apart, the air between us charged with something I was afraid to name. He was my best friend's brother. He was 7 years older than me. He was someone I barely knew, and yet had known forever. This wasn't supposed to happen. Logan's eyes dropped to my mouth, and I felt myself sway toward him, drawn by some force I couldn't resist. Then his phone rang, shrill and demanding in the quiet room. We both startled, the moment shattered. Logan stepped back, pulling his phone from his pocket with a muttered curse. He glanced at the screen, then at me, his expression unreadable. "I have to take this," he said, his voice rough. "It's Miles." And just like that, reality crashed back in. Miles, my best friend. Logan's brother. The reason we knew each other at all. "Of course," I said, stepping further away, wrapping my arms around myself. "Go ahead." Logan answered the phone, turning slightly away from me. "Hey, yeah, I just dropped him off." "No, it's fine. I can come get you." He listened for a moment, then glanced at me. "Okay. See you soon." He hung up and we stood in awkward silence, the tension between us now tinged with something like regret. "Miles's car broke down," he explained. "I need to go pick him up." "Sure," I said, trying to sound normal. "No problem." Logan ran a hand through his hair, his expression troubled. "Ethan, It's fine," I cut him off, not wanting to hear whatever he was about to say. An apology, maybe, or worse, an explanation for why what had almost happened couldn't happen again. "Really, go help Miles." He hesitated, then nodded. I'll see you around. Yeah, I said, though I had already decided I would avoid the Winters house for as long as I could. See you around. I watched from my window as he drove away, his taillights disappearing around the corner. Only then did I let myself sink onto the edge of my bed, heart still racing, lips still tingling with the ghost of a kiss that hadn't happened. This is my best friend's brother, I thought, the realization both terrifying and exhilarating. I shouldn't feel this way. But I did. 3 days later, my resolve crumbled. Mrs. Winters called, asking if I could help Logan move some things in the garage so he could work on the motorcycle. He says you offered to help, she added, and I couldn't bring myself to correct her, to admit that no such offer had been made. So I found myself walking up the familiar driveway on a hot Saturday afternoon, the sun beating down on my shoulders, sweat already beating at my temples. The main house was quiet when I knocked. Miles was working at the coffee shop where we'd both been employed during college, and Mr. and Mrs. Winters had taken Emma shopping for school supplies. No one answered, so I made my way around to the garage. The side door was propped open with an old brick, and I could hear music playing inside, something classic rock that reminded me of long car rides with my father. Logan was bent over the motorcycle, his back to me, wearing a faded gray t-shirt that clung to his shoulders, worn jeans with a tear in one knee. His hair was damp with sweat, curling slightly at the nape of his neck. I stood in the doorway, watching him work, the competent movements of his hands as he removed a part from the engine, the shift of muscles beneath his shirt when he reached for a tool. There was something mesmerizing about his focus, about the careful precision with which he handled each piece. "You just going to stand there all day?" he asked without turning around. I started, embarrassed at being caught staring. "Sorry, your mom asked me to help move some things." He straightened then, turning to face me, wiping his hands on a rag tucked into his back pocket. "Yeah, I asked her to call you." His eyes met mine, steady and unreadable. "Figured you'd been avoiding me." Heat crept up my neck. "I've been busy." "Right." He didn't sound convinced. "Well, since you're here..." He gestured to a stack of boxes pushed against the wall. "Those need to go to the corner so I can pull the bike out more." I nodded, grateful for the task, for something to do with my hands that didn't involve standing awkwardly in the doorway. We worked in silence for a while, the music filling the space between us, neither mentioning what had almost happened in my apartment. The garage grew hotter as the afternoon wore on, the air thick and close. Logan switched from working on the motorcycle to clearing space along one wall, moving old tools and dusty equipment. I found myself watching him more than I should, the way his shirt darkened with sweat along his spine, the flex of his forearms as he lifted a heavy toolbox. "Hand me that wrench," he asked, pointing to a tool on the bench near where I was sorting through a box of old manuals. I picked it up and crossed to where he knelt by the bike. When I held it out, our fingers brushed, a brief electric touch that made me freeze. My hand still extended, the wrench suspended between us. Logan's eyes lifted to mine, dark and intense in the shadowed light of the garage. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. "Thanks," he said finally, his voice low and rougher than before. I nodded and stepped back, retreating to the relative safety of the box I'd been organizing. My heart was pounding too hard for such a small interaction, my skin hypersensitive where his fingers had grazed mine. "This is ridiculous," I told myself. It was nothing. It meant nothing. But when Logan stood and pulled his damp shirt over his head in one fluid motion, tossing it onto the workbench before reaching for a clean one from his bag, I couldn't look away. His back was broad and tanned, muscles shifting beneath skin marked with a scattering of freckles across his shoulders. A tattoo I hadn't expected curled around his right shoulder blade, something abstract and intricate that disappeared beneath the new shirt before I could make sense of it. He turned, catching me staring again. This time, neither of us pretended I wasn't. "Your mom didn't really ask me to help, did she?" I said, the question coming out before I could stop it. Logan's mouth curved into a small, almost apologetic smile. "No." "Why did you want me here?" He was quiet. "Why did you want me here?" He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes never leaving mine, as if searching for something. Finally, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Because I can't stop thinking about you," he said, the words hanging in the hot, still air of the garage. "And I needed to see if I imagined what happened the other night." My throat went dry. "Nothing happened." "Exactly." His voice was low, almost pained. "Nothing happened. But something was going to." I couldn't deny it. The tension between us was palpable, had been from the moment he'd walked back into the Winters' kitchen. But acknowledging it made it real, dangerous, a line we couldn't uncross. "Logan?" I started, but didn't know how to finish. What could I say? That I'd spent the last 3 days replaying those moments in my apartment, imagining what might have happened if Miles hadn't called. That I'd been avoiding the Winters house because I wasn't sure I could trust myself around him? "We shouldn't," I said instead, the words sounding weak even to my own ears. "I know." He leaned against the workbench, arms crossed over his chest, a defensive posture that somehow made him look vulnerable rather than closed off. "You're Miles' best friend. You've practically grown up in this house. I'm his brother. It's complicated." Complicated. The word felt too simple for what was happening between us. This pull that defied explanation, this tension that had appeared from nowhere and yet felt like it had always been there, waiting. "I should go," I said, taking a step toward the door, but not moving any further. Logan watched me, his expression guarded, but his eyes giving him away. Dark, with something that made my pulse quicken. "Do you want to go?" "No," I thought immediately. But I nodded because it was the right thing to do, because walking away now might save us both from whatever mess we were tumbling toward. "Okay," he said softly, and the disappointment in his voice made something twist behind my ribs. "I won't stop you." I took another step toward the door, then paused. "Your mom thinks I'm helping you move things." A small smile ghosted across his lips. "We moved some boxes. That's not a lie." "Right." I shifted my weight, caught between staying and going, wanting and shouldn't. "I should still probably—" The sound of tires on gravel cut me off. We both turned toward the open garage door as a car pulled into the driveway. Mr. Winters' sedan. "They're back early," Logan said, pushing off from the workbench. "Dad was supposed to pick up Miles from work after shopping." As if on cue, the car doors opened, and I heard Miles's voice, followed by Emma's laughter. Logan and I looked at each other, a moment of silent communication passing between us. Whatever had been building here would have to wait. "We finished most of the heavy lifting," Logan said loudly, switching seamlessly into casual conversation as footsteps approached. "Thanks for the help, Ethan." I nodded, grateful for his quick thinking, for the way he'd made our time in the garage sound innocent and ordinary. Miles appeared in the doorway, grinning when he saw me. "Hey, didn't know you were coming over." "Your mom asked me to help move some stuff," I said, the half-truth coming easily. "For the motorcycle?" "Dad's letting you work on it?" Miles asked Logan, his eyebrows raised in surprise. Logan shrugged, said I might as well try since it's just gathering dust otherwise. Miles turned back to me. "You staying for dinner?" "Mom's picking up pizza on the way home." I glanced at Logan, who was studiously arranging tools on the workbench, his back to us. "I should actually get going. I have some work to finish for a class." "Lame," Miles said good-naturedly. "But fine. Abandon me to family dinner." I forced a laugh, trying to sound normal. "Next time." As I walked to my car, I felt Logan's eyes on me through the garage doorway. I didn't look back. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake in my small apartment, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun lazily overhead, stirring the warm summer air, but providing little relief. My thoughts kept circling back to Logan, to the way he'd looked at me in the garage, to the words he'd spoken with such raw honesty. "I can't stop thinking about you." The confession echoed in my mind, stirring something dangerous and thrilling beneath my ribs. It would be easier if it were just physical attraction, that I could understand, maybe even dismiss. But it wasn't just that. There was something about Logan that called to me on a deeper level. The quiet intensity with which he moved through the world, the careful way he chose his words, the vulnerability I glimpsed beneath his strength. This is wrong, I told myself for the 100th time. He was Miles's brother, my best friend's brother, 70 years older than me, just back from years away, probably still dealing with things I couldn't begin to understand. And yet, I'd been 17 when he left, still figuring out who I was, what I wanted. He'd been 24, already a man, already leaving. We'd barely spoken then, just passing interactions when I was at the Winters house, brief moments that shouldn't have left any impression. But they had. I remembered the way he'd ruffle Miles's hair as he walked past, the quiet concentration on his face when he fixed things around the house, the rare smile that transformed his serious features. Had I always seen him differently? Had something always been there, waiting to be acknowledged? My phone buzzed on the nightstand, jolting me from my thoughts. I reached for it, squinting at the bright screen in the darkness. A text from an unknown number. "It's Logan. Miles gave me your number. Hope that's okay?" My heart stuttered in my chest. I sat up, suddenly wide awake, staring at the message as if it might change before my eyes. Before I could decide how to respond, another text came through. "I'm on the back porch. Everyone's asleep." I knew what he was asking without him having to say it. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, common sense warring with the pull I felt toward him. "It's late," I finally typed back. "I know. But I can't sleep." 3 simple words that mirrored my own restlessness. I hesitated, then typed, "Me neither." There was a long pause before his next message appeared. "I'll be out here for a while. Not a question, not a demand. Just an open door, if I wanted to walk through it." I set my phone down, pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes, and tried to think clearly. Going to the Winters house now, in the middle of the night, to meet Logan alone. It crossed every line I'd been trying to maintain. And yet, 20 minutes later, I was in my car, driving through the quiet streets of our town, streetlights casting pools of yellow light on empty sidewalks. I told myself I was just going to talk, to clear the air, to establish boundaries. But even as I thought it, I knew it was a lie. The Winters house was dark when I pulled up, parking a little way down the street so the sound of my car wouldn't wake anyone. I walked up the familiar driveway, my footsteps sounding too loud in the stillness of the night. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the yard, throwing shadows beneath the old oak tree where Miles and I had built a fort when we were 10. I followed the stone path around to the back of the house, where a wide porch wrapped around the kitchen. And there was Logan, sitting on the steps, arms resting on his knees, looking up at the stars. He turned at the sound of my approach, and even in the darkness, I could see the surprise on his face, as if he hadn't really expected me to come. "Hi," I said softly, stopping a few feet away. "You came." His voice was quiet, a little rough around the edges. I nodded, suddenly uncertain now that I was here. "We should talk." "Yeah." He shifted over, making space for me on the step beside him. "We should." I hesitated, then sat down, careful to leave a few inches between us. The wood was still warm from the day's heat, smooth beneath my palms. Above us, stars punctured the velvet darkness of the sky, so many more visible here than from my apartment in town. For a while, we just sat in silence, the night sounds creating a gentle backdrop, crickets chirping, the distant hoot of an owl, the soft rustle of leaves in the occasional breeze. It was easier like this, side by side, not looking at each other. "I've been thinking about what you said," I finally spoke, my voice barely above a whisper. "About not being able to stop thinking about me." Logan was quiet for a moment. "I shouldn't have said that." "Was it true?" He turned to look at me then, his face half in shadow, half illuminated by the moonlight. "Yes." The simple honesty of his answer made something twist inside me, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. "I don't understand this," I admitted. "Any of it. We barely know each other." "Don't we?" he asked, his voice thoughtful. "You've been coming to this house since you were a kid. You're in all the stories Miles tells. You're in my mom's photos, at holidays, birthdays. You've been a part of this family in a way I haven't been for years." I hadn't thought of it that way, that while he'd been gone, I'd been here, weaving myself into the fabric of his family's life. "That's different," That's knowing about someone, not knowing them. Logan nodded slowly. Maybe. But I've been thinking about it a lot since I got back. About how I remember you. This quiet kid who was always watching, always noticing things others missed. How different you seemed from Miles and his other friends, who were all noise and movement. He paused, looking down at his hands. I noticed you, Ethan. Even back then. More than I should have, probably. The confession hung in the air between us, loaded with implications I wasn't sure I was ready to face. You never said anything. You were a teenager. I was leaving. He shook his head. It wouldn't have been right. And now? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. Logan looked at me, his eyes searching mine in the darkness. Now you're 23. I'm 30. We're both adults. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I was beginning to recognize as a sign of his uncertainty. But you're still Miles's best friend. I'm still his brother. That complicates things. Yeah, I agreed softly. It does. We fell silent again, the weight of all the unspoken things pressing down on us. I was acutely aware of him beside me, the heat of his body just inches from mine, the clean scent of soap, and something uniquely him, the steady rhythm of his breathing. Why did you come back? I asked suddenly. To Riverbrook, I mean. After all this time. He was quiet for so long, I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, heavier, edged with something I couldn't quite name. I needed something familiar, he said, something real. After 6 years of what I saw, what I did, he trailed off, then started again. The military changes you, makes you hard in places that shouldn't be hard. I came back because I needed to remember who I was before all that. The vulnerability in his voice made my chest ache. Without thinking, I reached out and placed my hand over his, where it rested on his knee. His skin was warm, his knuckles rough beneath my fingers. He went very still at my touch, but didn't pull away. Did it work? I asked softly, coming back. He looked down at our hands, then turned his over so our palms were pressed together, his fingers curling loosely around mine. The simple touch sent electricity up my arm, made my heart stutter in my chest. I'm not sure yet, he admitted. Some days I feel like a stranger here. Other days... His eyes lifted to mine. Other days I feel moments of... I don't know. Peace, maybe. Is that what you're looking for? Peace? Logan's thumb brushed across my wrist, a small, almost unconscious gesture that made my breath catch. I never let myself want anything, he said quietly. Not in a long time. It was easier that way. Safer. But then you looked at me like that. Like what? I whispered. Like you saw me. Not the soldier. Not Miles's brother. Just... me. The raw honesty in his voice undid something in me. I felt exposed. Seen in a way that was both terrifying and exhilarating. I do see you. His grip on my hand tightened slightly, and I watched as he struggled with something internally, his expression shifting in the moonlight. This isn't fair to you, he said finally. Whatever this is, I don't know if I'm whole, I suggested when he faltered. A sad smile touched his lips. Yeah, something like that. None of us are, I said. Not really, we're all just figuring it out as we go. Logan's gaze held mine, something softening in his expression. When did you get so wise? I read a lot, I replied, a small smile tugging at my own lips. His answering smile was brief but genuine, a flash of warmth in the darkness. Then, his expression grew serious again, his eyes dropping to our joined hands. If Miles knew... The mention of my best friend's name was like a bucket of cold water. I slowly withdrew my hand, immediately missing the warmth of his touch. He can't know, not yet. Not until we figure out what this is. Logan nodded, understanding in his eyes. What is this, Ethan? It was the question I'd been asking myself since the moment he'd walked back into the Winter's kitchen. What was this pull between us? This recognition? This feeling that had no right to exist and yet refused to be ignored? I don't know, I admitted, but it scares me. Me too, he said softly, and the admission, so honest and unguarded, made my heart twist. We sat in silence again, the night wrapping around us like a blanket, sheltering our whispered confessions from the sleeping house behind us. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, then fell silent. The world felt very still, as if holding its breath with us. I should go, I said eventually, even though leaving was the last thing I wanted to do. It's late. Logan nodded, but made no move to stand. Can I see you tomorrow? The question was tentative, uncertain in a way that seemed at odds with the strength he carried in his shoulders, the steadiness of his hands. It struck me then how vulnerable he was allowing himself to be with me. This man who had been trained to show no weakness, to keep his emotions carefully controlled. Yes, I said, because I couldn't say anything else, because despite all the reasons we shouldn't, I wanted to see him too badly to pretend otherwise. Relief flickered across his face, followed by something warmer. I'll text you. I nodded and stood, brushing off my jeans more for something to do with my hands than out of any real need. Logan rose too, suddenly close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the shadows his eyelashes cast on his cheeks in the moonlight. Ethan, he said, my name a whisper on his lips, and I knew if I didn't leave now, I might not leave at all. Good night, Logan, I said, taking a step back, then another. I'll see you tomorrow. As I walked back to my car, I could feel his eyes on me, watching until I disappeared around the corner of the house. Only when I was driving home, the windows down to let in the cool night air, did I allow myself to acknowledge the truth. I was falling for my best friend's brother, and I had no idea how to stop. The next day dawned hot and bright, the kind of relentless summer heat that makes the air shimmer above the pavement and turns car interiors into ovens. I woke early, despite how little I'd slept, my thoughts immediately turning to Logan and our conversation on the porch. The memory of his hand in mine, the vulnerability in his voice when he'd spoken about coming home, the way he'd said my name just before I left. It all played on a loop in my mind, making it impossible to focus on anything else. His text came just after 9. Meet me at Raven Point. 11 a.m. Raven Point was a secluded spot overlooking the river, about 20 minutes outside of town. A place people went to be alone, to think, to escape the smallness of Riverbrook for a while. My heart raced as I typed back, I'll be there. I spent the next hour and a half alternating between changing my clothes 3 times and trying to talk myself out of going. This was reckless, I knew. Whatever was happening between Logan and me couldn't lead anywhere good. If it went wrong, I wouldn't just lose him. I might lose Miles, the Winters family, the closest thing to a real home I'd ever known. But at precisely 11 o'clock, I pulled into the small dirt clearing that served as a makeshift parking area at Raven Point. Logan's truck was already there, the only other vehicle in sight. I sat in my car for a long moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, heart hammering in my chest. I could still leave, I told myself. I could text some excuse, drive away, put an end to this before it began. Instead, I got out and followed the narrow trail that wound through the trees to the overlook. The path was dappled with sunlight filtering through the leaves overhead, the air thick with the scent of pine and earth. As I rounded the final bend, the trees opened up to a rocky outcropping that jutted over the river below, offering a panoramic view of the valley, the water glittering in the sun like scattered diamonds. Logan was sitting on a fallen log near the edge, his back to me, shoulders silhouetted against the vast sky beyond. He must have heard my approach because he turned, rising to his feet in one fluid motion. You came, he said, an echo of his words from the night before, but this time with a small smile that made my stomach flip. You sound surprised, I replied, stopping a few feet away. He shrugged, a gesture that managed to convey both casualness and vulnerability. I thought you might change your mind, come to your senses. Is that what it would be? Coming to my senses? Maybe, he said, his eyes never leaving mine. This is Complicated. I felt my lips curve into a rueful smile. You keep saying that. Because it's true. He gestured to the log he'd been sitting on. Sit with me. I nodded, crossing to sit beside him, closer than I had on the porch steps the night before, but still with space between us. Before us, the river wound its way through the valley, bordered by dense forest that stretched toward distant hills shimmering in the summer heat. I used to come here a lot, Logan said after a moment, his gaze on the horizon. Before I enlisted, when I needed to think. I didn't know that, I said softly. He glanced at me. There's a lot we don't know about each other. The words hung between us, both an acknowledgement and a question. Where did we go from here? How did we navigate this unknown territory? So let's fix that, I said, surprising myself with my boldness. Tell me something I don't know about you. Logan studied me for a moment, then looked back to the view. I write poetry, he said finally, the admission clearly costing him something. Bad poetry, probably, but it helps process things. I tried to hide my surprise. It was not what I'd expected. This man with his calloused hands and military bearing, writing down his feelings in verse. But it fit, somehow, with the thoughtfulness I'd always sensed in him. Will you show me sometime? I asked. He gave a short laugh, running a hand through his hair. Maybe, if you promise not to judge too harshly. I wouldn't. His eyes found mine again, serious now. Your turn. Tell me something I don't know about you. I thought for a moment, wanting to offer something real, something that mattered. I've never felt like I belonged anywhere, I said finally. Except maybe at your house, with your family. Logan's expression softened. Mom always says you're her third son. I know. I smiled, though it felt bittersweet. That's what makes this so complicated, he supplied, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. Yeah. We fell silent again, but it was a comfortable silence, filled with the sound of the river below, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the occasional call of a bird high overhead. I was acutely aware of Logan beside me. His steady presence, the way his knee was just inches from mine, the rise and fall of his chest with each breath. Can I ask you something? I said after a while. About the military? He tensed slightly, but nodded. You can ask. I might not answer. Fair enough. I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. You said it changed you. Made you hard in places that shouldn't be hard. What did you mean? Logan was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, more distant, as if he were looking at something I couldn't see. War strips you down, he said, takes away all the softness, the parts that make you human. You have to be hard to survive, to do what needs to be done. But then you come home and that hardness doesn't fit anymore. It's like armor you can't take off. I listened, my heart aching for the struggle I heard in his voice, for the weight he carried. Is that why you came back to Riverbrook? To find those softer parts again? He turned to look at me, something raw and honest in his gaze. Maybe, or maybe I just needed to remember what it felt like to be part of something real. He paused, his eyes searching mine. With you, though, I don't feel like I have to be hard. For the first time in years, I feel like I can just be. The confession hung in the air between us, fragile and precious. I understood then what he was offering me, not just attraction or desire, but trust. Vulnerability. The parts of himself he kept hidden from everyone else. Logan, I said softly, not sure what I wanted to say, only knowing that I needed to bridge the space between us somehow. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment before gently brushing a strand of hair from my forehead. The simple touch sent electricity through me, made my breath catch in my throat. I don't know what I'm doing here, Ethan, he admitted, his voice low and rough with emotion. I just know that when I'm with you, I feel awake, like I've been sleeping for years, and suddenly I'm not anymore. I understood that feeling, the sense of something waking up inside me that I hadn't even known was dormant. It terrified me and thrilled me in equal measure. If this goes wrong, I whispered, voicing the fear that had been haunting me, I lose you, and I lose my best friend. Pain flickered across Logan's face. I know. His hand dropped to his side. If you want to walk away, I understand. We can pretend none of this happened. But we both knew it was too late for that. Whatever was growing between us had taken root too deeply to be easily uprooted. Still, he was giving me an out, a chance to retreat to safer ground. Is that what you want? I asked, watching his face carefully. Logan's eyes met mine, and I could the conflict there, the battle between what was right and what he felt. No, he said finally, the word barely audible. But I don't want to hurt you either, or Miles. The mention of Miles hung between us, a reminder of all the reasons we shouldn't be here, shouldn't be feeling what we were feeling. And yet, what if, I said slowly, we just take it day by day, figure it out as we go, keep it between us for now? Hope flickered in Logan's eyes, quickly tempered by caution. You'd be okay with that? With keeping secrets from Miles? No, a voice inside me answered, but the alternative, walking away from whatever this was before we even understood it, felt impossible. For now, I said, just until we figure out what this is, if it's real. Logan nodded, understanding in his eyes. Day by day, he agreed softly. We sat there for a while longer, talking about safer things, books we'd read, places we'd been. Simple things that helped us learn the contours of each other. As the sun climbed higher, the heat became oppressive, sweat beading on my forehead. Want to go somewhere cooler? Logan asked, noticing my discomfort. There's a spot down by the river. I nodded, grateful for the suggestion. We followed a narrow path that switchbacked down the steep hillside to the river below. The air grew cooler as we descended, the canopy of trees providing blessed shade from the relentless sun. The path ended at a small pebbly beach nestled in a bend of the river. The water was clear and swift-moving, looking gloriously cool in the summer heat. Without hesitation, Logan sat on a large, flat rock near the water's edge and began untying his boots. What are you doing? I asked, though it was obvious. He glanced up, a hint of mischief in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. Cooling off. He pulled off his boots and socks, then stood and walked to the edge of the water, stepping in with a small hiss at the temperature. Coming? I hesitated only briefly before following suit, removing my shoes and rolling up my jeans. The water was shockingly cold against my skin, numbing my feet almost instantly, but the relief from the heat was immediate and welcome. Logan waded in a bit further, the water reaching his calves, soaking the hem of his jeans. He didn't seem to care. He stood with his back to me, face tilted up to catch the dappled sunlight that filtered through the leaves overhead, his posture more relaxed than I'd seen it since his return. It's beautiful here, I said, moving to stand beside him in the shallow water, the current tugging gently at my legs. He nodded, looking out at the river as it curved away from us, disappearing into the trees downstream. I used to fish here with my dad when I was a kid. Before Miles was old enough to come along. I tried to picture it, a young Logan with his father, learning to cast a line, to be patient, to read the water. It was a side of him I hadn't known existed, a piece of his history I'd never been part of. You've never mentioned that before, I said. He glanced at me, a small smile playing at his lips. There's a lot I haven't mentioned before. He paused, his expression growing more serious. I want to, though, with you, if that's okay. The simple honesty of his words made my heart swell. I'd like that. We stood side by side in the cool water, close but not touching, as the river flowed around us, constant and ever-changing. I was intensely aware of him beside me, the rhythm of his breathing, the way the breeze ruffled his hair, the strength in his profile against the backdrop of trees and sky. Can I ask you something? I said, my voice quieter than I'd intended. Logan turned to face me fully. Anything. In the garage yesterday, when you said you couldn't stop thinking about me. I swallowed, gathering my courage. What exactly have you been thinking? A flash of something hot and intense crossed his face before he mastered it. That's a dangerous question, Ethan. I know, I said, holding his gaze even as I felt heat rise to my cheeks. I'm asking anyway. Logan was silent for a long moment, his eyes never leaving mine, as if weighing how honest to be. Finally he spoke, his voice lower, rougher. I think about your eyes, how they see everything, miss nothing. I think about your hands when you sketch, how careful and sure they are. He took a small step closer to me in the water. I think about your mouth when you smile, how I want to be the reason you smile. My heart was hammering so hard, I was sure he could hear it above the gentle sound of the river. What else? I whispered. His eyes darkened, but he shook his head slightly. If I keep going, I might do something we're not ready for. The tension between us was electric, charged with unspoken desires and carefully maintained restraint. I knew he was right. We were standing on the edge of something, and once we stepped over, there would be no going back. But in that moment, with the sun filtering through the trees and the river flowing around our legs, and Logan looking at me like I was something precious and rare, I didn't care about going back. What if I am? I said, my voice barely audible above the sound of the water. Ready, I mean. Logan's breath caught, his eyes dropping briefly to my lips before meeting my gaze again. Are you sure? I wasn't, not entirely. But I was sure that I wanted him, had wanted him since the moment he'd walked back into the Winter's kitchen and looked at me with those serious, haunted eyes. I nodded, not trusting my voice. He moved closer, slow enough that I could have stepped away if I wanted to. I didn't. His hand came up to cup my cheek, his touch gentle, almost reverent. I leaned into it, my eyes closing briefly at the sensation of his calloused palm against my skin. Ethan, he whispered, and I opened my eyes to find him looking at me with such intensity that it took my breath away. I've wanted to do this since the first night I came home. And then he was leaning in, his lips brushing against mine. Tentative at first, a question more than a kiss. I answered by pressing closer, my hands coming up to rest lightly on his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath my palms. The kiss deepened, became something real and urgent and devastating. His arm wrapped around my waist, pulling me against him, water splashing around our legs as we moved. I slid my hands up to his shoulders, then to the back of his neck, fingers threading through his hair. It felt like falling and flying at the same time, like something breaking open inside me, like coming home. His mouth was warm and insistent against mine, his hands strong where they held me, and I was lost, completely lost in the sensation of Logan Winters kissing me like I was something he'd been searching for all his life. When we finally broke apart, both breathless, Logan rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed, his hand still holding me close. Wow, I managed, my voice unsteady. A smile curved his lips, and he opened his eyes to look at me. Yeah, he agreed softly. Wow. We stood like that for a long moment, the water flowing around us, the world narrowed to just this, his arms around me, my hands on his shoulders, our breath mingling in the small space between us. This changes things, I said finally, reality beginning to seep back in at the edges of the perfect moment. Logan nodded, his expression growing more serious. Are you okay with that? I thought about Miles, about the Winters family, about all the complications and potential heartbreak that lay ahead. But then I looked at Logan, at the vulnerability in his eyes, at the way he held me like I was something precious, and I couldn't bring myself to regret what had just happened. Yes, I said, I'm okay with it. Relief washed over his features, followed by something warmer, deeper. He pressed a gentle kiss to my forehead, then stepped back slightly, though he kept hold of my hand. We should probably head back, he said reluctantly, before we get sunburned out here. I nodded, equally reluctant to leave this private world we'd created, but knowing he was right. We waded back to shore, our wet jeans clinging uncomfortably to our legs, and gathered our shoes. As we made our way back up the steep path to the overlook, Logan reached for my hand again, his fingers twining with mine in a gesture that felt both new and somehow familiar. At the top, we paused to catch our breath, looking out over the river valley one more time. Logan's thumb traced circles on the back of my hand, a small, intimate gesture that made my heart flip in my chest. "What are you thinking?" he asked, watching me with those perceptive eyes that seemed to see right through me. "That this terrifies me," I admitted, in the best possible way. He smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his face, made him look younger, lighter. "Me too." We walked back to our cars hand in hand, only letting go when we reached the small clearing where they were parked. Reality was waiting for us here. Responsibilities, complications, the need for secrecy, at least for now. "I have to help my dad with something this afternoon," Logan said, leaning against his truck, reluctance clear in his voice. "But maybe later?" "I have a shift at the coffee shop," I said, "until 9. Disappointment flickered across his face, quickly masked. "Another time then." I stepped closer, brave in a way I hadn't been. The next 2 weeks, Logan and I existed in a bubble of stolen moments and careful secrecy. We developed a system, a language of our own. Texts about the motorcycle that really meant, "I miss you." Afternoons in the garage that turned into kisses in the shadows when the house was empty. Late-night meetings on the back porch when everyone was asleep. It was exhilarating and exhausting in equal measure. The constant vigilance, the fear of discovery, the lies that piled up with every passing day. It wore on me, made me jumpy and distracted. But then, there were the moments when it was just the two of us, and nothing else seemed to matter. Like the night Logan showed up at my door at midnight, soaking wet from a sudden summer storm, just because he needed to see me. Or the afternoon we spent in the garage actually working on the motorcycle, his hands showing me how to take apart an engine, put it back together, his eyes lighting up as he talked about something he loved. I was seeing sides of him I suspected few others ever had. The lightness that occasionally broke through his serious exterior. The quiet humor that surfaced when he felt comfortable. The softness that appeared only when we were alone. "He's always been strong," Mrs. Winters had said to me one evening as we watched Logan help his father move a heavy table. "Even as a boy, never complained, never showed when things hurt." She'd sighed then, a mother's worry in her eyes. Sometimes I wonder if that's a good thing. I understood what she meant now. Logan carried a kind of strength that was both impressive and heartbreaking. A rigid control, a careful containment of everything he felt or feared or wanted. But with me, that control slipped. With me, he allowed himself to be soft. I saw it in the way his hands trembled slightly when he touched me sometimes, as if overwhelmed by what he felt. In the way he'd bury his face in my neck after we made love, breathing deeply, holding on. In the quiet moments when he'd talk about things he never spoke of to anyone else, the nightmares that still woke him sometimes, the guilt he carried, the uncertainty about his future. "You make me feel human again," he told me one night as we lay tangled together in my bed, the moonlight spilling through the blinds, painting silver stripes across his skin. "With you, I remember who I was before. Before everything." I didn't know how to respond to that, overwhelmed by the weight of what he was entrusting to me. So I just held him closer, pressed my lips to his shoulder, and hoped he understood what I couldn't find words for. That I would keep this part of him safe, this vulnerability he showed only to me. But as beautiful as those moments were, the secrecy was beginning to take its toll. I was seeing Miles less and less, making excuses to avoid game nights and movie marathons, afraid that if I spent too much time with him, he'd see the truth written all over my face. The guilt was a constant presence, a shadow that darkened even our brightest moments. Logan felt it too. I could see it in the way his expression would shift when Miles's name came up, in the tension that would creep into his shoulders when we were at the Winters house together, pretending to be nothing more than old acquaintances. "We need to tell him," Logan said one night as we sat in his truck, parked on a deserted overlook outside of town. It had become one of our safe places, somewhere we could be together without worrying about being seen, somewhere we could talk without whispering. I stared out at the lights of Riverbrook below us, twinkling like earthbound stars in the valley. "I know," I said, though the thought made my stomach clench with fear. "But how? What do we even say?" Logan ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I now recognized as a sign of his inner turmoil. I don't know. Hey, Miles, I'm in love with your best friend. The words hung in the air between us, unexpected and monumental. Love. He'd never said it before, not directly. Neither of us had, though I'd felt it growing inside me with each passing day. I turned to look at him, my heart hammering in my chest. Is that what this is? In the dim light of the truck's cab, I saw a vulnerability in his expression that made my throat tight. For me? Yes. His voice was steady, despite the emotion in his eyes. I love you, Ethan. I think I have since the moment I walked back into that kitchen and saw you standing there with a plate of my mom's cookies. Something broke open inside me. Relief and joy and terror all mixed together. I love you too, I said, the words both the easiest and hardest I'd ever spoken. God, Logan, I love you so much it scares me. He reached for me then, pulling me across the center console into his arms, his mouth finding mine in a kiss that felt like a promise, like the beginning of something we couldn't take back. When we broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. We'll tell him, he said. Together, soon. I don't want to hide anymore. I nodded, though the fear was still there. A cold weight in my stomach. What if he hates us? I whispered, giving voice to the worry that had haunted me from the beginning. Logan's hand came up to cup my cheek. He might be angry, he acknowledged, confused, hurt even. But Miles, he loves both of us. That doesn't just disappear. I wanted to believe him, needed to. But the closer we got to having to face the truth, the more terrified I became of losing everything. Not just Miles, but the family I'd found in the winters, the home I'd never had anywhere else. The night before we planned to tell Miles, I couldn't sleep. I paced my small apartment, anxiety clawing at my insides, scenarios playing out in my head. None of them good. By 3 a.m, I was a wreck, and I did the only thing that made sense. I texted Logan, "Are you awake?" His response came almost immediately. Yes. Can't sleep either. A moment later. Meet me? I knew I should say no. We were supposed to be careful, smart. Meeting in the middle of the night before we planned to upend everything, was neither. But I needed to see him, to draw strength from his presence. Where? I'll pick you up in 10. True to his word, Logan's truck pulled up outside my apartment building exactly 10 minutes later. I slipped outside and into the passenger seat, immediately reaching for his hand where it rested on the gear shift. Hey, he said softly, his eyes taking in my face, my obvious exhaustion. You okay? I shook my head. Not really. He nodded, understanding without me having to explain. Me neither. He squeezed my hand. Let's go somewhere. We drove in silence, leaving the sleeping town behind, following winding country roads that led deeper into the hills. Finally, Logan turned onto a narrow dirt track that I'd never noticed before, the truck bumping along for a few minutes before he pulled to a stop in a small clearing. Where are we? I asked, looking around at the thick trees surrounding us. Nowhere special, he said, killing the engine. Just somewhere quiet. He got out and walked around to the back of the truck, lowering the tailgate and climbing up. I followed, settling beside him on the blanket he'd spread across the truck bed. Above us, the sky was a vast canvas of stars, the Milky Way a smudge of silver-white dust against the darkness. It's beautiful, I said, leaning back on my elbows, tilting my face up to the sky. Logan nodded, his eyes on the stars. Used to come here sometimes. After I enlisted, before I left. Trying to make sense of things. I turned to look at him, his profile sharp against the night sky. Did it help? A small smile touched his lips. Not really. But it felt good to be reminded how small I was. How small everything was. I understood what he meant. Under this endless sky, our problems seemed momentarily less daunting, our fears less all-consuming. I shifted closer to him, drawn to his warmth in the cool night air, and he wrapped an arm around me, pulling me against his side. We sat like that for a long time, watching the stars, neither of us speaking. The silence was comfortable, filled with all the things we'd come to understand about each other without words. But eventually, the thoughts I'd been trying to escape found me again. What if it all goes wrong tomorrow? I asked, my voice small in the vast night. Logan's arm tightened around me. Then we deal with it, together. But what if Miles can't forgive us? What if your parents... Ethan. He interrupted gently, turning to face me. We can't control how they'll react. We can only be honest about how we feel, about what we want. I swallowed hard, trying to push down the panic rising in my throat. And what do we want? What are we even doing, Logan? The questions had been building in me for days, the uncertainty growing alongside the love. What future could we possibly have when our beginning was built on secrets and potential heartbreak? Logan was quiet for a moment, his eyes searching mine in the starlight. Then he shifted, moving to sit cross-legged in front of me, taking both my hands in his. What I want, he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes, is you, us, whatever that looks like, however hard it is. He paused, his thumb tracing circles on the back of my hand. I want to stop hiding, to wake up with you and not have to leave before dawn, to tell my brother and my parents that I found someone who makes me feel alive again. The raw honesty in his voice, in his expression, made my throat tight with emotion. I want that too, I whispered. I'm just scared. I know, he said, squeezing my hands. Me too. We fell silent again, the weight of tomorrow pressing down on us despite the vastness of the sky above. The night was growing colder, a chill seeping into the air that made me shiver. Logan noticed and pulled me to my feet. Come on, he said. Let's get in the cab. It's warmer. We climbed back into the truck, but instead of starting the engine, Logan just turned the key enough to power the stereo. Soft music filled the space between us, something indie and melancholic that reminded me of the first night he'd driven me home. I leaned my head against the cool window, watching my breath fog the glass. Beside me, Logan was silent, his profile illuminated only by the faint glow of the dashboard lights. He looked tired, I realized, weighed down by the same fears that were keeping me awake. Maybe we should wait, I said suddenly, to tell Miles. Maybe we need more time to figure things out. Logan turned to look at me, something shifting in his expression. Is that what you want? More time in secret? I heard the hurt beneath the question, the fear that I was pulling away. No, I said honestly, but I'm scared of losing everything. My best friend. Your family, the only place I've ever felt like I belonged. Understanding softened his features. He reached across the space between us, his hand finding mine. I can't promise that won't happen, he said quietly. But I can promise that whatever happens, you won't be alone. You'll always have me, Ethan. Always. The conviction in his voice, the certainty, it steadied me, anchored me in the storm of my own fears. I laced my fingers through his, holding on like he was a lifeline. Thank you, I whispered. He nodded, his thumb brushing gently over my knuckles. Then he took a deep breath, his expression growing more serious. Listen, there's something else I need to tell you, he said, his voice low against the backdrop of the music. I got a job offer in Portland. The news hit me like a physical blow, unexpected and disorienting. Portland, as in Oregon? He nodded, his eyes never leaving mine, gauging my reaction. Uncle Dave has a friend with a garage there, specializes in restoring classic motorcycles. He saw the work I've been doing on Dad's bike, said he could use someone with my skills. My mind raced, trying to process what this meant. Portland was hundreds of miles away. A different state. A different life. When would you go? I asked, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. That's the thing, Logan said, squeezing my hand. I haven't decided if I'm going at all. I stared at him, confusion mingling with the shock. What do you mean? It sounds perfect for you. A small smile touched his lips. Maybe. But there's something keeping me here. His eyes held mine, intense and vulnerable all at once. Someone. The implication of his words settled over me slowly, warming me from the inside out despite the chill in the air. Logan. I haven't told anyone else, he said quickly, not even Mom and Dad. I wanted you to be the first to know. Because what you want, what we want, it matters. It changes things. I didn't know what to say. The thought of Logan leaving, of losing what we just found, made my chest ache, but the thought of him staying for me, possibly resenting me later for a missed opportunity, that was equally painful. When would you have to decide? I asked finally. Soon, he admitted. By the end of the month. Less than 2 weeks. The timeline hung between us, adding another layer of pressure to what already felt like an impossible situation. What do you want me to do, Ethan? Logan asked softly, his voice strained with an emotion I couldn't quite name. Tell me to leave. His voice cracked slightly. Or tell me to stay. The question, so simple, so impossible, hung in the air between us. In his eyes, I could see everything he wasn't saying. That he wouldn't go if I asked him to stay. That he was offering me a choice that would change both our lives. That he was trusting me with a decision he couldn't make alone. My heart raced, thoughts tumbling over each other in a frantic rush. If I asked him to stay, what would that mean for us? For his future, would he resent me eventually? But if I told him to go, would that be the end of whatever was growing between us? Could we survive the distance, the separation, when what we had was still so new, so fragile? The silence stretched between us, heavy with all the things I couldn't say, couldn't decide. Logan watched me, waiting, his expression open and vulnerable in a way that made my chest ache. And I said, nothing. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I had too many, all conflicting, all terrifying in their potential to change everything. Logan's hand tightened around mine for a moment, then relaxed. He didn't push, didn't demand an answer I wasn't ready to give. Instead, he just leaned closer, resting his forehead against mine, his eyes closing. It's okay, he whispered. We don't have to decide tonight. The understanding in his voice, the patience, it undid me in a way nothing else could have. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, a tightness in my throat that made it hard to breathe. I'm sorry, I managed. Shh, he murmured, his hand coming up to cup the back of my neck. I know, it's a lot, it's okay. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, foreheads touching, breathing each other's air, the music playing softly around us like a cocoon against the world outside. In that moment, I understood something about love I'd never known before, that sometimes it was about holding on, and sometimes it was about letting go. And the hardest part was knowing which to do when. Eventually, Logan started the engine, the familiar rumble breaking the spell of silence that had fallen over us. As we drove back toward town, the first hints of dawn were coloring the eastern sky, turning the darkness to deep blue. A new day was coming, bringing with it all the challenges we'd been dreading. But as I looked over at Logan, his profile outlined against the lightening sky, I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. Whatever happened next, with Miles, with Portland, with all of it, we would face it together. And somehow, in that moment, it was enough.